Last time, on Professor Layton and the Incongruent cases, we looked at the box art differences between the American, European, and Japanese versions of the original trilogy of Professor Layton games. This time, I will be covering the prequel trilogy, Katrielle, and the Ace Attorney crossover. I recommend that you watch the original trilogy video first, but let's not waste any more time on the intro and just get into these box art differences. Professor Layton and the Last Specter, or The Specter's Call, in Europe, was the first game to release on the original DS before the series moved to 3DS. The American and Japanese art were pretty similar, with the only real differences being a difference in the sky color, or the city moving slightly higher or lower depending on the region. The European version uses what I called the window style in my last video, which is when there is something serving as a window for the audience to see some sort of art through, which is usually a shrunken version of the Japanese box art, but not always. In this example, the window is a literal window. One difference between the American one and European one is that the title is Specter's Call, instead of The Last Specter, which I really like. Specter's Call just sounds more mysterious, and the title stylization looks even nicer than the other releases. Europe's cover also has the addition of a tagline below the window. Discover how the Layton saga began, and crack the professor's toughest case yet. It's pretty cool. Professor Layton and the Miracle Mask was the first 3DS Layton game, and also the first one to feature 3 limitedly derivative covers. Usually, the Layton covers would have some sort of crossover in their art, but I would call these quite original. The American version was pretty bland this time around. It's just Layton, some puzzle previews, and you can see a bit of that carnival in the back, but it doesn't really give you much info about what you're about to play. Honestly, if I didn't already like the Layton games, this probably wouldn't have attracted much of my attention on the store shelves. Kid Icarus Uprising, Dream Drop Distance, Pokemon Black and White 2, and Fire Emblem Awakening all came out in 2012, and this cover was their visual competition? Come on. The Japanese cover is part of an even weirder situation. It's this minimalist cover with Layton, some cool outlines, and not much else. It's visually striking despite not telling you much about the game itself. But it's not the only cover that Layton 5 had in Japan. Apparently some releases of the game had this cardboard cover that slipped over the entire game case. It looks more like a birthday party than a circus with this slipcase, but it still looks nice and even includes Luke and Emmy. While I'm on the subject, Nintendogs had one of these too. Apparently some 3DS games had these to differentiate them from DS games, according to some guy called Brian on NintendoEverything.com. Oh wait, he's the guy who created NintendoEverything.com? Okay, I guess I trust him for now. I can't find any other pictures of early Japanese 3DS slipcases in this style though. So if you know any other game like this, let me know about it. The European version looks great. It continues the trend of having a tagline to describe the story of the game, which I really should have given the European original trilogy credit for in my last video. This one says that you'll explore the depths of Layton's past, which I would have thought was interesting if I lived in Europe when this came out. It's weird to me that there weren't any poster-style covers between the 3 versions of this game, because I would have liked to see more of that circus behind Layton. But at least it isn't boring. With Azran Legacy, the final game in the trilogy of prequels, the United Nations really came down on America, Japan, and Europe, forcing them to all create the same cover for the first time in the Layton series. At least that's what I'm assuming happened, because the only noticeable differences between Japan's cover and the others are that the background is obviously blue, and the subtle fact that the puzzle previews are all slightly ahead or behind in solving the puzzle for the Japanese previews. I find it kind of odd that those puzzle preview pictures were not just shared between each region. Spin-off time. When it comes to Professor Layton versus Phoenix Wright, America has a very basic cover, with Layton and Phoenix looking all cool together. There's some dudes in the back, but apparently we are not allowed to see them clearly because they're all transparent and shrunken. Do I really have to wait until the outro segment to tell you that the Japanese cover is the coolest one? Look at all those characters, look at the detailed art, and look at how serious Layton and Phoenix look on the cover. It's not as cool as like Chrono Trigger's box art, but it's really cool. Apparently, the cool Japanese art is even more verboten in Europe than it is in America. since everything is shrunken even more, and there's this weird stone thing in the way now too. Those are probably supposed to be the pillars in front of a courthouse or something, which is thematic, but it's still a weird choice. Side note, Germany has this USK rating system that they put on their games, just like the ESRB, PEGI, or CERO. Unlike other countries though, theirs has to be bright yellow and gigantic for some reason. It looks pretty terrible. Now, for the final Layton game as of today, we have Katrielle and the Millionaire's Conspiracy. I haven't gotten around to playing Katrielle yet, so I feel underqualified to talk about it. At least with the other games, I have context about what the characters and settings on the cover are to influence my opinions and my commentary, but I know practically nothing about Katrielle or her game. With that said, I'll start with the 3DS versions. America and Europe both got very basic window-style covers, with very little detail beyond the picture of Katrielle and the ship within the window. It's an okay cover, but it's weird that Europe's cover didn't continue the trend of having those little taglines to describe the story of each game, like with the first 6 games. I liked those. Japan, on the other hand, got this bright and happy one of Katrielle setting out on a new adventure with what I'm assuming is London in the background. That tower has some cool perspective stuff going on. I think that dog can talk, but I'm not fact-checking that. As for the Switch re-release, which is the one I will get someday, the American and European releases shared a cover once again, which has the same Katrielle pose as the 3DS ones, but also has these puzzle previews. The Japanese one is pretty cool. It has a bunch of characters I've never seen staring at Katrielle, as I'm assuming she says something incredulous that will lead to the solution of a case, just as Herschel Layton did before her. One issue I have with this one is that the game's logo is blocking all the other characters' feet, so at first glance, it kind of looks like Katrielle was standing on a table with some dog while everyone's just like, Katrielle, get the hell off the table. In the last video, I had a segment of my quick thoughts on each cover, and which one was my favorite for each game. And guess what? It's back. Last, Specter. The United States and Japan dropped the ball, and for the first time in the series, I think the European version has the best cover. That title looks really classy compared to the other versions, and I appreciate how the title doesn't cover up the eyes in the sky like the other cases do. The irony of the window style appearing as a literal window is not lost on me either. I really like this window. Miracle Mask. I really don't think any of these cases are as good as they could have been, but if I had to choose one, it would be the Japanese version. The Layton outline, or sketch, or whatever, is really visually striking and unique. Despite looking nice, it doesn't tell you much about the game, which is a shame. Luckily, the slipcase does show aspects of a festival, and I always appreciate when a game has a slipcase or other bonuses. The American one is bland, and the European one looks like the packaging of a kid's toy. I'm really not into them. Azran Legacy. It's really a matter of me preferring blue or brown, considering that's the only difference here. I'll go with the Japanese one because it kind of reminds me of a Sheikah slate, and glowy techno blue is a pretty cool color. Professor Layton versus Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. I already said this earlier because it's so obvious. The Japanese one is really cool, the American one is okay, and the European one was a mistake. Katrielle and the Millionaire's Conspiracy. There are a lot of cases this time around, but like half of them suck, so this is easy. The American and European Switch cases are on the bottom. Super boring. That's your D tier. C tier has to be the 3DS releases for those same regions. It's not bad. It's just not very interesting. It's cool that it looks like the front of a nicely bound journal though. B tier is obviously the Japanese Switch version. It's a scene with an actual background. Katrielle doing something, and some characters that I've never met. Katrielle, get off that goddamn table before you hurt yourself! Finally, the most superior box art is the Japanese 3DS version. It just looks like a really nice poster with a confident Katrielle, a nice bright setting, somebody's dog. That's your S tier. Thanks for watching this video. I wasn't sure who the audience for something like this would be, but I'm glad that there actually were some people who liked the first one in this 2-part series. We don't have any more Layton videos planned specifically, but we do have a lot more on the way about things like games, weird history, music, and a variety of other topics. If you're interested in more videos about video game box art specifically, check out this one by Nakey Jakey. about gaming box art in general. Or this one by Cybershell on classic Sonic the Hedgehog box art. I like those videos a lot, and they probably inspired me to make these two videos on Layton. With all of that said, and a whole two-parter complete, this has been Molten.Permit, and once again, you've been a great audience. The final game in the prequel trilogy of prequels